So good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, yes, indeed. I'm Alexander Lingas, music director of Cappella Romana, and we're here at in the hall of Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Portland, Oregon. Thank you so much for coming out after what turned out to be a beautiful day in Portland, a non-rainy one. This is a presentation, informal talk that we'll have here, and then have a chance also for some questions afterwards. Just to note that we are recording this as well, so that it will be available to our sort of friends and supporters and interested parties on the internet afterwards. Sort of right off the bat too, also just before we proceed to the main focus of tonight's program, just to make a couple of announcements. That Cappella Romana, we're based here in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon, and also with concerts in Seattle. But we travel around quite a bit. So we will next be on the road in May with a 4-city tour in Romania. And then also we just had confirmed that we will be appearing for the 4th time at the Utrecht Early Music Festival in September. So this is the world's largest festival of early music. We'll be singing our program of Good Friday in Jerusalem. So that's sort of one world of what we do, but this is a very different one here this evening, where we're following on some initiatives and lines of exploration that began during the pandemic when we weren't able to give concerts, but just sit back and reflect a bit on what it is we do and how we do it, and how what we do in Cappella Romana relates more widely to the society around us. And so last year we brought this to actual real performing life with a wonderful program that included music by Dr. Sean Wallace and Mother Catherine Weston, and Derek McDuffie was here earlier, and who was led his wonderful group Kingdom Sound in that joint effort. So this evening we are focusing on the work that will be performed tomorrow in Seattle and on Saturday in Portland, and that is the Canon for Racial Reconciliation. It's a setting of a text by Dr. Carla Thomas, who is a physician in Alabama, who also serves on the board of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, where I teach part-time, and where I was just a few days ago. And we have this evening, we're so fortunate to have with us the composers and conductors of this work, which is a category, it's sort of a Venn diagram here, because we have, so I'll allow them to introduce, let's say a few more words about themselves, but just to note that sort of then going to my left are Nicholas Reeves, who is one of the composers, and then Anthony Maglione, who is one of the conductors, and then summing it all up is Isaac Cates, who is both a conductor and a composer of this work. Of course, Nicholas is involved as a performer as well throughout this, so everyone is wearing multiple hats. It's just an amazing, I've been at the rehearsals the last few days, and it's really been an amazing journey, just sitting through it, and just the kaleidoscopic nature of the work in terms of the styles, but then all brought together in just a marvelous way. So what we're going to be doing this evening is then allowing them, rather than me, so sorry if I'm sounding too much like a musicologist now, but I'll let them do the talking. So first, just going to go one by one and perhaps to introduce yourselves and say a little bit where you're from, and then we'll get to talking about the work specifically.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas Reeves. I'm currently teaching at Adelphi University in Long Island. I also am a choir director in an Orthodox church. I'm a composer and an arranger and a singer. And for the purposes of this concert, a keyboardist and a multimedia triggerer. And I'm very happy and flattered to be part of this collaboration.
Hi, I'm Anthony Maglione. I'm conducting on this performance, and my ensembles are the ones that brought it. My school and my ensemble, in tandem with Isaac, are the ones that did the premiere last year in Kansas City, and so that's why we're here. But I'm a conductor and a composer as well, and for the purposes of this concert, I'm conducting and watching, and I'm cueing Nick for all of his multimedia. But I'm currently serving at William Jewell College in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm also an Episcopal. I work for the Anglo-Catholic Church parish in Kansas City, St. Mary's. But that's until August, and then I'm moving to Houston, and I'm taking over the Houston Symphony Chorus and the University of Houston Director of Choral Activities position. So I'll be moving down to Texas after that. So this is my kind of last hurrah, at least as a Kansas City person, with the next person you're going to meet.
My name is Isaac Cates, and I am a proud Kansas City, born and raised. I'm a musician, singer, songwriter, composer. I lead a group, a gospel group I've had for almost 21 years now, called Ordained. And we have several albums out. You should go download them, because some of the things maybe that even show up in this piece maybe show up in some of my other works with them. I also serve as the Director of Music Outreach at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. We have 9 locations now, 27,000 members, something crazy like that. I've enjoyed working with my group, and then I also started a choir called Affirmations, about 130 singers. It's a collaboration of singers from all around Kansas City who have come together for several nights of worship that we have in Kansas City. I also do a lot of work out internationally with choirs. And then of course I'm the co-composer on this amazing piece.
Thank you. Thanks. Such amazingly talented people that we have here. So anyway, so now we're going to speak about the work itself, this musical setting of this text by Dr. Carla Thomas, the Canon of Racial Reconciliation. So I have some questions for the composers to start off with. So how did it come about that you came to compose this work? How did the idea come about? What motivated you?
In the spring of 2020, there was a sermon my priest gave in my church, and he was it was the day of Pentecost in the Orthodox Church, and he was commenting on the death of George Floyd. And there reached a fever pitch where bipartisan politics no longer adequately described our human experience. And so he had me, as the choir director, sing with our choir the text Carla Thomas wrote, the Canon for Racial Reconciliation, in a simple style of chant. And there were some texts there that really struck me, that I would never hear before in the Orthodox Church, about race, about skin color, about past misdeeds, but moving forward through all that in Christ. And so I contacted Anthony Maglione, and I said, would this be a possibility to program? And he said, yes, but his project was to have 2 practitioners of both the Orthodox Church, which represents Dr. Carla Thomas's faith tradition, and also the African American church experience, which represents her background as a person. And Tony recommended Isaac Cates, and so I got to know Isaac's work more. And then from that point, we were down a long, circuitous path to get to where we are on Friday night and Saturday night. The work is quite hefty, and Isaac and I and Tony all went through personal transformations in our family during this whole process. It almost didn't come together, But last night, especially hearing how the ensembles were responding to the piece, I'm very grateful that we stuck it out, and now we come to this point.
Yeah, I did everything he said. We started before we even started composing anything. We just sat down and spoke, and just to get to know each other and get to live in each other's worlds. And then I think one of the most probably poignant thing for me was that we, had Nick explained to me just really what the liturgical elements were, because I knew nothing about, very little about Orthodoxy, so just wanted to have a historical perspective and then to see musically, and then I had to learn all these terms, and I was like, what is earmos and conductor, and what is all of this? And I know there were at least 2 or 3 times I was like, I'm sorry, explain this to me again, and he was like, yeah, no, I got it, no, yeah, absolutely. So he was very patient, and then I brought some things to him from the Black choral tradition, and just, we figured out ways to find some commonality and just sort of meld the worlds together. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't. It was really interesting what you just said, because I wasn't aware that the collaboration, that this bridge, you were literally the bridge. You're in a row there now. Yeah, but from the very beginning. Yeah, so actually maybe you could say a few words actually.
Okay.
About the early stage.
You're asking an academic to say a few words. Challenge. Okay. Take out your notebooks, there'll be a test. No, so when Nick approached me about the text, he shared the text with me and said, I would really love to set this, do you think we could find it? And so my immediate response was, well, yeah, but let's think bigger. Let's think outside of what has ever been done before, to our knowledge. Like, we have no frame of reference for something like this. And let's reach out to a community of singers and musicians that we don't get to work with ever, because this is the appropriate time to do it, and let's do it with authenticity. And the way we do that is we reach out and collaborate with, first of all, pieces of music aren't usually written by 2 composers in the classical medium, right? And so in our world, that's just not what happens. But then to think of, not only are we going to do 2 composers, but we're going to have, now, I do want to say, Isaac is a tremendous classical musician as well as a gospel musician, and he runs that whole gamut and knows how to teach choir top to bottom, all of it. But he also is a remarkable gospel composer. And so knowing someone that knew the whole of what we were trying to get to, that could really collaborate, I was fortunate enough to have had Isaac work with my students, and I saw the brilliance that was there, and I was like, this is the way we've got to do it. And so I pitched it to Nick. Nick said, okay. We got in touch. We all wrote a proposal, and we took it to my school, and the administration jumped on it and funded the project.
That's remarkable, actually, because it's what you say, all of you. It just has I mean, it seems to have been just a particular historical moment as well, because for those of you who were here last year, to hear Abbess Catherine Weston discuss her work, and she also collaborated. She wrote a setting of the Divine Liturgy. She's an African American Orthodox nun who wrote a setting of the Divine Liturgy, and she worked very closely with Jean Aleman, Dr. Jean Aleman, a conductor from the Russian choral tradition. And that the 2 of them were together, and that when we brought them together with the performance last year with Cappella Romana, where we also had a group of singers that was mixed between cappella singers and kingdom sound, and placing these things side by side with spirituals on which they were based, that I think there seems to be again a particular historical moment that people are looking for these connections and finding them, which is and just hearing the rehearsal yesterday, there were all sorts of connections, new ones that formed in my mind just listening to your amazing work. So okay, we've already heard that there was this forest of new terminology that you had to sort of plunge into. So what is the canon of racial reconciliation? Go.
I'll start from the structural perspective. So For those of you who are familiar with the canon structure of the Orthodox Church, canon means rule, and the rule of monastics in previous centuries was to have this poetic structure of 9 odes, and each ode had a biblical theme. And their rule was to have themes about Moses crossing the waters, Hannah, her deliverance, Habakkuk, Isaiah, Jonah and the whale, the 3 youths praying in the furnace, and then the 3 youths celebrating their deliverance in the furnace, and then the Lucan text of the Magnificat, when Mary is approached by the Archangel Gabriel. And so that monastic rule got translated into these iterations of poetry that connected a theme of the day with those biblical ideas. So you can have in one ode a theme about Moses, and then your new poetic iterations, or troparia, are trying to highlight some other aspect of what happened in the Old Testament, but how it applies for a certain theme, feast day. In this case, with Carla Thomas, it's about race. It's about racism, it's about slavery, it's about what reconciliation isn't. One of the lines says it's more than being sorry, and so she keeps into that strict structure of the Orthodox canon. And in that strict structure, there were many opportunities to find commonality with the Black church tradition. And so one of Isaac's big suggestions was to look at a local composer who passed away in the Kansas City area. Her name was Eva Jesse. And Isaac's part of the documentary project on this composer. She was part of the Harlem Renaissance. Her choir was the opera chorus in George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. She was also hired to be a choir for the March on Washington with Martin Luther King. And I think she had a position at one of the Michigan State universities. And she wrote, arranged, performed. One of her publications from the 1920s is called My Spirituals. It's her recollection growing up in the Kansas City area of what spirituals were from oral tradition, and she arranges them for piano. And she said it's not an exhaustive summary of Deep South singing. It's things that she grew up with, ergo, My Spirituals in the title. And what's really fascinating about this text is because of when she was writing this in the 1920s, she was sourcing her materials from people who were former slaves in some cases. And so Isaac highly encouraged me to see, is there a way we can weave this in so we have a third composer? And this is another aspect of reconciliation, where a female composer who is Black, her voice gets to be heard too. And so her spirit hovers throughout. So if in the Orthodox text we start with a text about Moses crossing the waters, then we'll quote a spiritual from Eva Jessa about Moses smoked the waters. And you'll see the parallel between the two. Or a text where you get the 3 youths in the furnace. We'll hear a quotation from a spiritual, give me the little book now, Daniel. Or references to, I see the Lord coming in a cloud in the spiritual. There's references in the Orthodox Church about the Lord descending on a cloud. And so I found that those junctures really worked well because they're rooted in the Old Testament. And then I'm gonna pass it over to Isaac. When we started to take that first step in seeing what were the places where the traditions were adjacent and not that far off.
Yeah, so from, well, just, I guess, when we think reconciliatory, I love that he mentioned the thing with the Eva Jesse, because she was a graduate of a Western University, Western College, which was near the Quindaro, Kansas area, which is where I grew up. It was maybe 2 blocks from where I was, and the college then it was defunct after I think about 60 years. But very at the time, it was a really notable place where Black scholars would go for music. You know, they named Nora Holt was one of the first Black musicologists to get a master's degree, and she was a graduate there. Edward Boatner was over the music, and if you've ever sung spirituals, he was really involved with that as well. And then of course Eva Jesse was a graduate there. So for me being a Kansan, and she was actually from Cherryville, Kansas, it was nice to just hear her name I think just that for me is really, really, really special, because we're just now, in maybe the last 10 years, starting to really hear about lesser known black composers who wrote non-idiomatic music. When I say non-idiomatic music, music that's not like gospel or jazz or something that likes for the concert stage, but rather took from those sounds and then elevated it to something else. And so you think about the Margaret Bonds and you know, and then Undine Smith and William Grant Still. And so she was a name that you don't know, and I think that's really significant, which is part to speak to the next part of what Nick mentioned, but they took their sounds. I mean, we think of nationalist composers, that's what they do, right? They take the sounds that they grew up with, and then they just sort of elevated. Liszt did it, you know. I'm going to Bergen, Norway in a couple months, the land of Edvard Grieg. I'm preparing some stuff for them with that, and so he took those things, those Norwegian sounds, and elevated it. And so I think that's really, you know, kind of what we did, is that we took our sounds in their really, really, really primal folk idiomatic sound, you know, and we were like, okay, there's areas of convergence here, you know, with regards to tonality, with regards to musicality, and then function. So for instance, you know, in black singing, I mentioned to Nick about line hymn singing. You know, where you have a presenter, they set something up, they sing some sort of either text or script. I mentioned to him, we called them Doc Watts, or they would call them Doc Watsons. They would say Doc Watsons, which means Dr. Watts songs, and Watts is actually Isaac Watts. So colloquially, that's how it sort of proliferated out in the black churches. And so, for instance, I love the Lord, he heard my cry, and pitied every groan. Long as I live and troubles rise, I'll hasten to his throne. Line hymn singing, that was very prevalent growing up in the Baptist church. You know, I would hear deacons sing, I love the Lord, he heard my cry. And then the congregation would go, ah. So they would finish the rest of the phrase. And he said, and Nick was like, oh, they do the same thing. We just call it a canon arc, more or less, right? And we were like, okay, so there's some ways modally that we can make these, musically make these themes work. So, yeah.
Just as you were singing, actually, it reminded me of some also the sort of call and response in the Ethiopian tradition.
Yes.
There's a lot of that, and especially sort of singing something in a kind of slow style, and then everyone takes it up. And anyway, just again, more connections keep forming. But yes, can you tell us a little bit more about the collaborative process and the sort of stylistic range of the work as well, because there's clearly an arc to this work, and if you could just tell us a bit how that worked into the text of the canon as Dr. Carla wrote it.
We wrote this piece right in the middle of lockdowns, so COVID was ever present, and regardless, Isaac and I lived so far apart from each other, so we had to do everything remotely. And so we used Google Meet and we used Google Docs, and so we made a giant chart through Google applications about the structure, what were some points of commonality between the two traditions, hyperlinks to different styles of singing in the traditions, and then we try to organize it very clearly so we can keep in mind where we were in a specific section, what the intention was, and also to link to that, handwritten notes, video notes, recorded notes, anything that could be used as a point of departure. And the line hymn singing was really instrumental in us getting going, because we were both hesitant to walk out that door first and to make a stand on something. But what we found was the a cappella approach was really advantageous, because I felt more comfortable relating to that. Because of my tradition, everything is sung a cappella. And that's very typical for Orthodox Christians to this day. And so line hymn singing became step one. But then there were other moments where we started to open up more, I think, emotionally to the piece, where we gave each other permission to try to see how could a sound world, that to me, when Isaac would play something, I would think, this sounds like contemporary Christian. And while I said, Isaac, there was one moment where I said, I really like this melody and this harmony, but I cannot find a way to make this work. And so I had to think, wait a minute, some of these pivots are reminiscent of early 20th century Russian choral music and harmony. And Isaac kept telling me over and over and over again that black church singers love lush textures, thick harmony. They resonate with that very, very, very viscerally. And he was wanting me to lean into that more. And so we found ways to incorporate, and Isaac was correct in saying this, not just gospel style singing, but contemporary Christian meets R&B singing from the 1990s. You know, also different styles of singing that are not just historical styles, and not just contemporary styles, but something in between, like a gospel music from, let's say, the 1920s, when it first was starting, what we call gospel music, listening to historical race record recordings of the 1940s, which to me gives a sort of thumbprint. It's as if when you hear people singing in recordings, they're leaving behind a piece of themselves, and you're going to hear that in the concert. You're going to hear historical recordings in the actual piece of music, historical recordings of very famous sermons. Quincy Jones said, just as the eagle fluttereth her wings, I believe that's the sermon from C.L. Franklin.
Oh, the eagle stirreth his nest?
Stirreth his nest, that's right. Quincy Jones said that was the most owned record of any black family in America. These records gave people a glimpse of, especially Southern style worship, when they would move to Michigan, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, and the Southern blacks weren't necessarily incorporated or welcomed into the style of worship in Northern black churches. And so there was a huge disconnect. And so the race records were a way for them to remember what it was like in the South. And sometimes entire communities would move from Mississippi and Alabama together to go to Los Angeles with their pastor. It was a way to get out of Jim Crow. But what you saw there is that influence of Southern black worship really permeates over the decades up north. And so it not only became a way for me to see places where both traditions were touching each other, it was a really informative historical lesson on not just music that we distinctly call black music, which it is, but in a way, music that we're all connected to as Americans. So we use the term black music, but we should think of it as, yes, black music, which is deeply American, and we all take part in some way, shape, or form, even if it's attenuated in this culture, in this history, because it informs how we think, our idioms, especially in entertainment, but also just culturally, how we speak with each other. American culture is not American culture without the contributions of black culture.
Yeah, just to expound and even give a little bit more of an explanation with regards to the gospel element that you hear. One of the things that I talked to Nick about when we started talking about what elements we wanted to incorporate, as I said, I think it should have more than just one facet or one era of gospel music. Gospel music, you know, it is American music, but it's vast. I mean, if you're talking about, you know, and we're not, so it's not just gospel. I would say it's even the influence of just black singing in general, because if you think the Negro spiritual is, you know, it's not gospel music, you know what I mean? It's felt its form and function, the way it came to be and all that is very old. If you start thinking about things from the antebellum period and things, but you hear some of that. So I think Nick did an amazing job of sort of laying out elements of, and so we have somewhat of a chronology, you know what I mean? So when he talks about the race records, even prior to that, I think like for instance, is it Ford, where this really has the Jubilee sound? Yeah. And so it's a total difference. It's black music, it's black style of singing, and you'll hear some samples from some records as well. But then we came on up forward, you know, into like this, you know, we jump into maybe the 70s/80s when you get a guy by the name of Timothy Wright, who was a wonderful choir leader from New York. And so you have really up-tempo, you know, so old, like five. It's just straight ahead, old school gospel from that era though. And then you come a little further up to maybe the 90s where the chord, the harmonic structure became a little bit more sophisticated. So you have influences of jazz and chord clusterings and moving tonal set, there's some different things going on. So, and he used a lot of that as well. That influenced, you'll hear just the world building that's happening, and then it goes between this Byzantine style and then back to gospel and then the spiritual. So it's interwoven, you know?
And I have a sample of that.
Nice.
So this is from the Kansas City premiere of Ode 5. This is more in that later 20th century gospel style. And Isaac is so adept at describing this. He'll say, oh yeah, this is from this decade, and this is from this decade, and this is from this composer. But what's great is you hear a really compelling contemporary iteration of what gospel music is amidst all the other styles you hear. So this is Thou Who Art the Light. And so in that example right there, you really get a sense of music that's inspired by from my perspective, the Pentecostal tradition, Assemblies of God in Christ, the incorporation of percussion, drums, but with gospel piano in there. And then it's a multi-section song too, because you had all this text, the odes have all these different paragraphs you have to set. And so for you, that became a compositional consideration of, okay, I can put in this section, I could put in this section, and what we get in that piece is we get a late 20th century survey of gospel, and so on and so forth. You're going to hear throughout the course of the whole concert a poetic historical lesson on not only just black music, but also Orthodox church singing, which is embedded in there as well. And the more I hear this piece, I really think we were brave enough to let it be its own creation, where it doesn't sound like neatly compartmentalized genres all the way through. In some movements there are, but in other movements, I think we came up with something that was its own amalgamation.
Actually, at the center of the work, though, near the center of the work, after the fifth ode, the sixth ode is spoken. It's essentially a homily, but in a kind of rhetorical style, which actually anyone who's heard, say, a sort of traditional Greek priest doing the Easter homily of St. John Chrysostom, where it kind of goes into a slightly sing-songy and people respond back and forth, that will be sort of very familiar and very much like the roots, actually, of some of these genres coming in the 4th and 5th century. So I think there's this very interesting way that you, in the different moves, sometimes through recording, sometimes through actual speech, explore that boundary between preaching and song. I just wonder if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, specifically that one. I started because Nick and I just, there's so many moments where we're like, okay, every couple of measures, we're like back and forth with each other, and then there are moments where he's like, okay, I'll take this and I'll get this, and you take, we divvy some elements, and like you run with the motif and get at least harmonic structure and just the arc of it going, and then I'll expound and add this part, and then so it was, no two were exactly written the same way. Really, this was one of the last ones, because Nick was really, Ode 1 is this mammoth, just Nick. Just brainchild, and with me interjected in a moment, and he had a lot of work to do with that. So he was like, "When you get 6 going tonight," I was like, And I spent so much time. I'm very old school in my compositional process. I mean, you think the Orthodox dude would be more, just writing by candlelight or something, but no. The gospel guy was. He is Mr. Techie and has got. And I am old school calligraphy with like staff notation paper. Photocopying it, sending it to him. He was gracious enough to look at my handwritten calligraphy. It's either super valuable or very worthless, one of the two that I had of that skill set. But he was able to make really, really good sense of it. And I started with my notation, and I had some ideas written down, and I already had some motifs that show up that you'll hear a lot. Nicole sings that she's one of our soloists and really covers the gospel element. And I started writing, I was like, nope. I think I wrote maybe 12 bars. I mean, I wrote something, and then I said, no. I put my pen down, my pencil down, I said, nope. I said, if this is going to truly be authentic to the style, to perform this piece authentically means you will either have to research by ear or employ the use of someone that knows this tradition, which is an oral tradition, which means they have to know what quote unquote black preaching is. At the end of a sermon, they have the homily, they have all the things, they give you their 3 points or whatever they're going to do, and at the end of it, they do what's called closing. And when they close, they start to intone, and there's a pivot word, you know. And so if there's if they say, oh, I don't know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures, and he lead me beside. And that's where all of a sudden there's where the singing part comes in at. I said, I want someone that knows this tradition. And so I did not write one note down. That means to do that element, that specific moment, you will have to engage someone, and it will be different every single time. The only thing that will not change are the words. Yeah.
Even in other parts of the score too. And don't get us wrong, there are a lot of notes.
A lot of notes.
There are a lot of notes. It is talk about a historical blast from the past. It reminds us what phone books used to be. It is a thick, double-sided use of trees.
2 measures each page.
Yeah, it's a large work. However, there are moments where it's, for the sermon, we decided the center of the piece would be the sermon. And our soloist is here tonight, Nicole, and she does an amazing job with this style and many other styles in the piece. Yes, please give her a round of applause. You're going to hear that. She's very self-effacing, but when she sings, you are going to be completely moved. So, Nicole, thank you for coming from Kansas City to be part of this event. She was given text, and I said, all right, Isaac, so in the official score, it just has the text, and it says, in the style of Black Church Sermon. And so you have to have a pianist who knows how to tune up, and you have to have a person who knows the sermon tradition and the shape of it, from speech and becoming more emphatic, to intoning, to having a melody at the end, and it builds and builds and builds in this energy where after that, what else can you do? And so there's a moment of dedicating yourself to Christ in the Black Church, where there's a moment of reflection. And so we decided to Isaac set this text called the Kentucky in the Orthodox Church, which has a very long, complicated history, but it can sum up a theme. And Isaac was able to, if I gave him any direction, I said, let's make a part of this canon a summary or an arc of a Black Church service. Maybe not in its entirety, that's not where we landed, but in some part. So the middle of the work gives you a little taste of an anthem, where it engages the congregation. That's just the excerpt I played right now. And then we build up in the emotional drive of the service with the message, the sermon. And then after that, I have a clip here too of that reflective moment. This is called the Kentuckian. And in the Kentuckian, you'll hear a radical emotional shift from what I played for you, Thou Art the Light, where everyone was clapping and energetic. So at this point, you have their attention. And now it's time for them to reflect a little more. Now, I never heard a talking like that, and I'm all for it. So that was just wonderful writing, Isaac, wonderful writing. But there's so much more to experience. I just want to save it for the show.
Yeah, I mean, really, we could. It's just so fascinating, you know. And we keep digging deeper and deeper into this. Makes you think we could do a whole, you know, sort of academic symposium day on this. But we have instead. What I'd like to do is then turn to the question of the premiere and the work from the performer's perspective. So, what can you all tell us about bringing this work to life for the first time in Kansas City?
Yeah, sure. That's a you question.
Okay. All right. So this, because of the nature of the work, is unprecedented, and we've never. Most programs will not have had a collaboration like this anywhere. So what we did was I have a professional choir in Kansas City called Cardinalis, and I also have students. My top 28 or so students joined us. So it was a very, very large group, and that was choir 1. And then Isaac's fabulous gospel choir, Ordained, based in Kansas City, was choir 2. And it was very meaningful because I don't think, so William Jewell College, where I serve currently, is a pre-Civil War institution. And so that comes with all of the history that comes with pre-Civil War institutions. And we were having very important discussions about acknowledging the history of our institution, how it came to be, how it was built, and who was responsible for it. And which were some very hard conversations. And there was, you know, and so this, to see what was a historically Baptist institution, which is no longer a part of the Baptist Church, but for over 100 years or so, over 150 years, was a Baptist institution. To see this institution that had, there were years in which women weren't allowed to be educated there. There were years in which people of color were not allowed to be educated there. And to see the progress over 150 years, and now in their 176th year. So that was literally the fall of the 175th year where we were able to make this kind of collaboration happen. And it was, all right, all that to set the stage for the fact that music like this, first of all, it's extremely, extremely challenging. Not Orthodox or gospel, they're both challenging in their own right, but then to put them together with sort of an avant-garde understanding of how to weave them together in a way that's distilled from being immediately accessible in terms of what you'll hear in this performance, you may not understand at the onset, but as you sit and listen, it'll all become clear. And that was the remarkably challenging part about putting something like this together. Because when you're putting styles together that have never gone together before, and you are finding commonality, but there's also, and for me, the whole piece has, so it's like when you slap your hands together in the water, right? And say one hand is Orthodox music, the other hand is gospel music. You find commonality, but after the slap, then there's reverberations out, right? And this is everything that is around the rest of it, and that's what makes the piece so challenging. And it's really hard to describe that to people who have not heard it yet. So for us, the real challenges were wrapping our minds around an extremely dense score that requires senza vibrato singing without vibrating. It requires full-on classical vibrato singing. It requires a gospel sound. It requires the sound of American Orthodox is where we were going with the choral singing. But then, even after conversation last night, I'm thinking, oh, I've got other ways that we can tweak this, because there's a section that's like Georgian chant, and so maybe we change our tone for that. So that's yet another color palette that we have to. And then on top of it, there's a trio of single line instruments: a trumpet, a violin, and a guitar, and there's a piano, and there's electronics. Okay, and so then on top of it, we're trying to keep all of this together. And the way these two wrote, sometimes all of that stuff is helpful. A lot of times, it's not helpful. But it's how it had to be. Because when you're trying something new, when you're trying to create something that is absolutely brand new, there are going to be pieces of it that you won't understand right away. You won't understand the impact of them right away. But as we have dug into this piece of music, no matter how hard the choir thought it was from the beginning, last night, for example, we started to see them really connect to things that are absolutely abstract. But they're finding the human, the humanity in the abstract, and in the way the things connect and reverberate off one another. I know that's kind of lofty speak, but that's really, really what it is. So that was the main challenge with performing, was trying to get that across to 18-year-olds, as well as I think the oldest person in the choir was 70. Right, and so we had this wide range of people from all different experience levels, from different traditions of singing, and what came together was an absolutely magical performance. Was it perfectly clean? Oh, no. I would have loved like another 6 weeks of rehearsal. But was it moving? Yeah, we moved people, we moved ourselves, we learned a lot about ourselves. And during that process, and now we were able to bring this here and work with a different group of people to give them a very similar experience. But now the piece in and of itself is moving and growing and changing, because now it's alive. And so when it gets a second performance, then it has life. And once it has life, then it starts to codify, and then it starts to become what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's please. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
And I was going to even add that everything he just said so eloquently. Realistically, you have a collaboration of people coming together where certain singers can do things that other ones cannot. Literally. So the singers that are phenomenal sight readers and are very well versed in choral music and that tradition and singing really difficult pitches and things like that, can do that. And so for instance, my group Ordain, some of them are readers, I just happened that I had studied music, and we have this similar background, but to do the tradition justice, I had to bring in singers who could also sing in a gospel tradition. Well, oftentimes it's either by rote singing or it's by ear, it's by, and so many of them don't have the same musical abilities from a notation standpoint. Inversely, I don't know one singer, I don't think, maybe in the opposite choir, that can do what a black gospel singer can do. You know what I mean? So we had to literally first humble yourself to say, you know what, this collaboration is special because we're super friends unite. You can do something I cannot do. I can do something you cannot do. We come together and create something what Nick spoke of that is so different and new and fresh. And there's quite a bit of discomfort for that. Because oftentimes, even when you sing in choir, even though you sing in different sections and may have a different vocal flock, or maybe you sung early music, or I don't know, you're a falcon soprano, or I sung Verdi or whatever, still it's in the same milieu, if you will, yes? Very rarely do you have to just go and are put totally out there. Also, as a black man, I will say it was wonderful to see people who ain't black go and try singing a black tradition. Oftentimes studying in academia as a black musician, we had to learn German lieder and French chanson and all these things and whatnot, and go into situations that are not what we grew up in, and we assimilate. But very rarely does the door open back the other way. and it just doesn't. It's not built in, and so I would say that even the conversation and the act of us doing that has been extremely informative and liberating. And then I will even just say, lastly, from the Orthodox tradition. I mean, I studied music. The only thing that we ever did was the Rachmaninoff on that vigil. Like that, we didn't, and Bogodarice did, but that's all we did. So it was nice to know something way more rich about the tradition. I was like, well, why don't we hear about this more? And like, this is amazing, gorgeous music, and so I thought that was incredible too.
And I think we should be very grateful, and we all are, that Cappella Romana is that organization.
Yeah.
Cappella Romana is an organization that presents at the highest level both Orthodox choral music, Orthodox cantoral music, and I am very encouraged, and I think we're all deeply honored that they were willing to produce this concert, which is also outside of their wheelhouse.
Yes.
And the risk that they took doing this to mount this production, it's a very large production for them. They also were dealing with the administrative changes in our United States government and still trying to get this production off the ground. And they did it. So I think they deserve a round of applause too. Thank you.
Well, in that you're bringing new things to us, but something that we've done all the way along, actually, as you say. I mean, just that in terms of even just to get the Byzantine cantorial world to meet some of these other things when the tunings are completely different,
Yes.
the vocal style, the ornamentation, everything else, and some of the things that you were describing about if we did not have people who had sat next to a cantor learning by ear the realization of these things and being able to improvise them themselves, even if they didn't have any names, even though it's a different notation system. But they're actually very similar issues that we're used to dealing with, and so in Cappella Romana we're thrilled to be breaking new ground, extending this, and helping you sustain and deepen this collaboration that's so marvelous that we heard about its beginnings. So, sort of what are the next steps for this work, the Canon of Racial Reconciliation? How can it become better known, and why should it?
I think the next step is going to be a big step. It's going to take a lot of support, and it's going to take a lot of encouragement. But I believe that this piece needs to go on the road. I think more people need to hear it. And I also think that with the right circumstances, we can get into a studio and record this work, because I think this is a powerful example of contemporary American music. And all of its manifestations, it's educational, it's moving, it's beautiful, and I am very much committed with everyone's encouragement and support for us to get the word out by coming to the concerts, supporting future projects, and I believe that those next steps will get the word out more, because once you dive into that ocean, you'll realize it is so rewarding to look into someone else's eyes and be in their shoes and dwell in that space. And then, if you don't eat with people, you will never understand who they are. And I think we do that literally. I mean, a fine gentleman like Mark Powell actually cooks us meals, and we all eat together, and that's very important. And singing together is, in some ways, very spiritual, sacred. And so by doing that musical meal that we have, that's another way we can get the word out and encourage other people to perform it.
The other thing, and I'm just going to continue right on with that train of thought. The premiere of this work, both Isaac and my groups get very, very good audiences. So we usually don't have to worry about whether we're going to have an audience. We wound up getting a venue that held about 800 people, and the whole bottom was full, and the balcony was almost full. We had almost 720?
Yeah, it was well over 7.
Yeah, it was over 700 people showed up. And there was an audience there that looked like no other audience I'd ever seen in anything in Kansas City. There were people in traditional Orthodox garb.
Yes.
There were
Clapping
and engaged. And there was, there were people from the Black church tradition. There were people who were followers of either one of us as artists in Kansas City. There were people that were followers and friends and family of every single one of the singers and instrumentalists, and it created, it was a remarkable room that evening. And I think that in and of itself, getting all those people in the same room to experience the same thing, to be moved in a room where the Spirit is actively working. That's why this piece needs to go somewhere. And if we're and our politics aside,
Exactly.
this is a human piece.
Exactly.
This is a piece about us as humanity, and the whole point of this is that it things have happened in the past, and we have to acknowledge that those things happened. We can't ignore them, but we also can't not talk about it, because if we don't not talk about it, then we can never say that it does not matter what we look like. It matters that he's a beautiful musician, and I want to play that music, and I want to sing that music. And I am profoundly grateful to be able to stand in front of it and conduct movements 1 through 4, and then movements 8 through 11, and then sit in the middle, and then watch Isaac share a podium with me, which is like, what an honor, right? To get to share a podium with Isaac, and to watch the music making, and to watch the singers, and to feel all of that. And for me, as someone who works in church music all the time, we don't always get to worship when we're the pastor, or when we're the music minister, or when we're the organist, right? We don't get to worship, but I do get to worship in movements 5, 6, and 7 while Isaac is on the podium, and it is remarkable, because that in and of itself, the whole piece in and of itself is an act of worship, whether you believe in the faith traditions or not. That's why we need to get it going.
Beautiful.
And I will say it is equally a privilege to watch Tony conduct. He's a phenomenal musician with incredible musical sensibilities, and just what he gets out of singers is extremely compelling. Instrumentalists, everybody, he just does such a phenomenal job with that. Specifically listening to like 3, watching you do Rock of Faith and the Sedalion. I mean, it's incredible. And I had to, as the last tier, to say, this work is so important. You know, I tell you, musical elitism will be the death of music if we are not careful. Elitism is not good. Okay, elitism bad. Okay, right? I mean, and I really mean this. I see the same beauty when I listen. People always ask me, "What are you when you're doing one of the interviews? What piece of music changed your life, and what are your influences?" And I always say so many different things. I mean, so every influence that I've ever had. I love Bobby McFerrin. I love Kirk Franklin. I love Parliament and Funk. I love Prokofiev as a pianist. I love, I see the value in all of it. And I will say that we need to be intentional about inviting people into our spaces. In Kansas City, a few months back, it's in a wonderful group called Exigence, I believe, right? And they did a recording with our symphony of Joel Thompson's, was it 7 Last Words of the Unarmed? Are you all familiar with that? If you've heard it, it's a phenomenal piece. It will gut you. He took, the setting, if you're familiar with the Dubois 7 Last Words of Christ, right? Like you do on Good Friday, like we're getting ready to all do. And he took the 7 last words of people of color, last words that they spoke before they were killed, or as they were killed. George Floyd, Philando Castile, I forget the gentleman that was choked, he said, "I can't breathe." Another one said, "Mama." And he took it, he said that to music. It is his power, and I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. It is a phenomenal piece. He's a black composer. But I was invited by some of the vocalists to come to that performance because they were doing the recording. I think I counted. I was sitting in the mezzanine. I think I counted 6 black people, and I had to be the only one in the room under age 60. and this isn't a dig, maybe it is a dig, but it is just a consideration that it's riveting. I invited one of my former students who's a cellist, and she's a singer, and she's a white young lady, and she was just losing it, and she was like, and we're all losing it because how significant, and I just looked because I was positioned to look out, and it wasn't even for the subscription, it was just like a private event kind of thing, and I was like, who else needs to hear this? But everybody needs to see this. This is not, surely this shouldn't just be for the major donors, especially with the ones who cannot relate to this material, this source material in the same way that others might be able to. And I think this message is for everybody. And so I think that is one of the ways that we can help this particular piece, and any new music, is being intentional about going and writing and emailing your local symphonies, your local concert masters, the people specifically. If you know somebody that has deep pockets, that are donors, they tend to sway things in a way that other people cannot. Just to lean their ear to at least listen to new music and say, you know what, the power in this piece, the power in the message that's happening in this particular piece, this resonates, at least listen to. And I would say, even I agree totally with what Nick is saying, is that it will need a lot of money, it will need to be recorded, it will need to get out there, and people will need to sing it, and excerpts of it, movements of it, because I know as a composer, which they both are, we all three are, I don't think there's any bigger honor than when people decide to program your music. That is the pinnacle. I mean, especially when you're not there. And it's amazing when you get brought in there, but when they resonate with your music enough to say, hey, I want to share this with my students, or my staff, or my team, or my whatever. For me personally, people ask me all the time, there are a lot of choirs and overseas that sing some of my settings, and I've heard things that sound better than anything I've ever written, the way they perform it better than I wrote it. And then I've heard ones that I'm like, ooh, it was rough, but I'm grateful that they did it, and I'm honored that the music has life. And I tell you, that is so important. This is an important work because it shows demonstratively what collaboration can look like, can sound like, and can feel like. And your voices, I know you may think, oh, what can I do? It carries way more weight than you think. Because audiences are shifting now. If nothing else, but for the fact that, think about all of the professional symphonies that were around 10 years ago that are no longer around, that have shuttered their doors. So I think being considerate and concerned with where the world is, no longer can you be tone deaf and intentionally oblivious, and that doesn't relate to me. It does relate to you because we need each other. We need each other, and this piece exemplifies that.
Yes, amen to all of that, and that certainly, with wearing my music director of Cappella Romana hat, I'm just so glad that we are able to help bring this process forward, and would very much like to keep doing so. Because it is really a work that deserves to be widely known. I think we've actually gone over the hour now, but we probably have a little time for one or two questions, if we have any from the audience. Anyone?
Are you? I can talk.
Oh, we need it for the recording.
Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering, it sounds like this is challenging music. Is there a possibility that you can transform it in a way that it can be sung by less accomplished but equally enthusiastic choirs?
That's a good question, actually. That's a good question. Stop.
I think the solution to that is to have extractions. There are pivots in the piece that are a cappella, that don't require any instrumentation, which means that's a smaller production value, and that are also more akin to the considerations of singers just using their ears. And so there's 3 or 4 movements that are just a cappella that could be extracted, and even a competent college choir could sing them, and you could even have some good church choirs, big urban area church choirs, sing them. I know Arvo Paird's piece, The Canon of Repentance, sometimes it's sung in extractions, And I think Cappella Romana is even in a production of Odes of Repentance, if I'm not mistaken, where you don't have to sing the entire work, but you can extract moments that give a summary of everything, but it's still very moving. And I think that is something Isaac and I have talked about during the whole process for 4 years, of how it could be more accessible as standalone works too. And we think that can also be a way to get the message out.
Tian, I think that is a marvelous question, and it's one that is definitely, we definitely have spoken about, and Nick is correct. There are certain pieces that are very much accessible, and then there are options, even with like 10. I mean, even though, for like the Amen, for instance, it's harmonically challenging, but the motif is actually accessible. You know what I mean? Like the fugue that happens, Free Our Hearts. I mean, you know what I mean? It's scholastic, but it's no more scholastic than you'd have to do with Bach. And I mean, it helps because Bach can be really hard too. But it is. There are moments that are really, really accessible too. And then, especially if you remove the elements of, like for instance, the MIDI controller part, that make, there are parts that make it more cutting edge, where if you sort of scale it down to the music itself, there are many moments that are very performable. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Actually, just before we close, I just had one sort of other reflection as you were talking about the work that was done by the symphony recently and so on. It just reminded me of, I think I can do one more sort of preview thing, that this coming year, in our next season, which hasn't been announced yet, but it is known that Cappella Romana will be presenting the North American premiere of a work called The Last Anthem, which Cappella is a co-commissioner of with the Istanbul Festival, and the Ernst von Siemens Foundation. And this is a work that I heard the premiere of in Istanbul, and this was a part of a concert that was put on to commemorate the expulsion of sort of the population exchange, the mutual expulsion of populations between Greece and Turkey that followed the wars, and so this occurred in 1923-24, and they had commissioned both a Greek composer and a Turkish composer to write pieces, and we are going to be doing the piece by the Greek composer Dimitris Skilas, which includes elements of the Orthodox funeral service, the poetry of Kostas Kariotakis, with most of it set in English to make it more universal, and sections of Ottoman poetry and Sufi texts. So it's that this ability of music to reflect on past wrongs and to seek reconciliation is something that very much comes alive in your work, which it's such a privilege to be able to nurture and bring to life once again this coming weekend. So thank you all. Thank you our speakers, composers, conductors, and to you who have come out this evening, and certainly to those who are watching us online.